Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I'm the director of the Ashland Public Library. And I can't even tell you how thrilled I am to be here with sci-fi and fantasy author Martha Wells, who has been this is like a dream meeting for me because I've been a huge fan for a long time. So before I get to Martha, I just want to say a couple things. One is thanks to the friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programming. I would also like to thank Martha, who allowed us to partner with other libraries to bring this program to you. So I'd like to welcome, of course, the patrons from Ashland, but also from these libraries: Burlington, Needham, Nashua, Tewksbury, Lexington, Somerville, Woburn, Marlborough, Spencer, Lunenburg, Carlisle, Edgerton, Marston Mills, Hopkinton, Norwell, Braintree, and Brookline. I probably should have put those in alphabetical order so you would know when I'm getting to the end. But we got together and we're making magic, and that is something that libraries do. So we will be talking for an hour. Please put your questions in the Q&A. I will be moderating questions to Martha from there. If you have chat, like you want to talk to each other about anything you've heard or want to say or whatever, feel free to use the chat. I will be making a note of what's going on there, but I will be taking questions from the Q&A. So with that being said, Martha Wells is here in the house. Well, in the virtual house. And she, of course, is an award-winning sci-fi fantasy writer of the Murderbot series, which we'll be talking about, and her most recent book, Witch King, which we want to hear all about tonight. So Martha, please tell us a little bit about yourself and Witch King.
Well, hi. I've been a science fiction fantasy writer for about 30 years. My first book came out in 1993, The Element of Fire, and I've done media tie-ins for Star Wars and Stargate Atlantis and Magic the Gathering. I've done young adult fiction, mostly it's been adult fantasy. The Murderbot Diaries was my first original science fiction, which came out, their novellas first came out in 2018 and kind of took off like a little wildfire. So and then my most recent book is Witch King, which it's a new secondary world. It's not related to any of the other ones I've written. It basically is about, I think of it as an epic fantasy, the good parts version. It's about the aftermath of the very big epic war against these conquering invaders who's come down onto this continent, and basically trying to these people trying to rebuild their world and keep it from degenerating into more an imperial government. It's kind of, I wanted to write about that to show that kind of thing over the long term. So the characters are immortal, but they've got just a very deeply personal stake in their world. And it was kind of my pandemic book too, because I'd actually, when the pandemic started in 2020, I had writer's block for about 6 months before I started working on this. So it's a book that's become very important to me as I've worked on it, and I'm really happy it's finally been published.
So are we. I mean, you can tell from the chat that people have been loving it. I'm already getting tons of questions, which is great, but I want to start off with a question about world building, because the one thing about Witch King is that you really just dump us right into the world and we figure it out as you write it, which is really interesting and different. So what part of that world building was your favorite part to create?
My favorite part is kind of the coming up with the food and sort of what we call in anthropology the material culture, the things that people use every day, the clothing. I always really like it, and kind of using that to develop a look for the world. And that's always been my favorite part. And I try not, I know that's like the icing on the cakes, but I like icing a lot. So I try not to do too much of that. while I'm going along, because I'll wander off into it and get lost.
Mm-hmm. But so going back into the sort of like we're dumped into the world and we figure it out as we go. One of the things I love about that is you don't handhold us, like you just trust your readers to figure it out with you. How did that structure come up for you? What was the purpose of that?
I've always liked books that do that. I've always liked, when I was younger, like in high school, and I used to I would start series like in the middle, or trilogies in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that it probably really started as not being able to find the first volume at the library or the bookstore or whatever. But I've always just kind of liked just being dumped into a fantasy world with no preparation, no prologue, and just figuring it out as I go along. And that's kind of how I tend to write. I don't do a lot of world building beforehand. I just kind of have the situation and the characters and just start going and start figuring out how, I usually have some kind of feel or look I'm going for, and I just kind of write toward that.
Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because your books tend to be very character driven. What is happening around a particular character. So one question that comes up from Wes is, how did Kai end up with the name Witch King, since he's not a witch and they don't have kings?
It came from the Grass Kings, or what they call the Sereti, the people the human people he originally lived with. It comes partly from that, and also the fact that he becomes the one who brings the witches into the Alliance to fight on the side of the Alliance, the Rising World Alliance. And actually, that's something I wanted to get into in a second book in this world.
Are we having a second book?
Yeah, we're supposed to. Hopefully, knock on wood.
Well, that was one of my questions, because there wasn't like empty like threads left, but there were so many points that you could go from.
Yeah, I did. I was thinking about doing a second book while I was doing the first one. So
excellent. Well, I think we all had that question. So I'm going to go back and forth between, some questions about Witch King and your other books. So what is your process with coming up with book titles? Do you, or does the publisher?
Sometimes, usually I come up with them. Sometimes they'll make suggestions if they don't like it. At least in my experience, it's not that publishers don't come up with the title that often. I mean, they'll usually discuss it with you if they don't think you've come up with if they think your title is not great. But most of the time it's your title. With the Murderbot Diaries, the Murderbot Diaries was originally the title of the book that was called All Systems Red. Mm-hmm. And my editor thought that was such a good title, we should use it as the series title so it could be on each book, which was a really good idea. And that was, because at that point, I don't think I'd done the second book yet, but I was going to I told them I was doing a second novella, but yeah, so it's usually something like that. Mm-hmm. And with Witch King, that was my title. And usually for me, either I come up with the title really early on in the book, or I'm just beating my head against a wall trying to come up with a title after the book is finished. I don't know what to call it. I have a friend, Nancy, who is a librarian, and she's, I think, probably come up with more titles for my books than I have. So, because a lot of times I'll workshop the titles with her, and we'll kind of come up with names and images of stuff that, you kind of want to give a feeling for the book. She came up with, I'm pretty sure, The Death of the Necromancer and The Harbors of the Sun, which was the last book in the Books of the Raksura series. And that's been one of my favorite titles. So yeah, sometimes it's easy, and it feels like there's no middle point. Either it's really easy or it's incredibly difficult. There's nothing in between.
Well, I was going to say when you mentioned your friend Nancy that librarians are magic. So
Yes, that's true. That's true.
I did say, and Megan asked the same thing. I love the cover of Witch King. Did you decide on how that was going to look?
Oh no, I don't really. I get usually it's consulted on the cover sometimes, or I know, so it depends on the contract. Sometimes you'll be consulted on the cover, cover approval or something like that. But Tor.com has a really fabulous art director in Irene Gallo. And that's why their books look so gorgeous.
Mhm.
And the artist was really excellent. So yeah, that's where that came from. And I know the editorial team, I think, I know they worked on different designs, just kind of going back and forth with what they wanted.
Mhm.
And I was really happy with what they came up with.
As was I. It sounds ridiculous. So back to Witch King, which we're talking about the cover. Does Kai ever figure out how to heal with his power?
Well, you'll find out in the second book about the time when I do. So.
Okay, no spoilers. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how about this question then? Can you tell us more about the difficulties grandmother faced in negotiating the agreement with the Underearth?
Yeah, that would have been. I haven't really developed all that quite yet because I'll probably reference it. I think grandmother is probably going to show up in maybe a flashback scene. That's kind of what I wanted to do, is where she actually figures out a way to talk to them before when the passage to the Underearth is still sealed off. But that could be a whole book in itself, basically, is her story going from basically an ordinary human and getting into this situation and coming out basically an immortal demon queen, so yeah, she was one of the characters I wasn't planning on doing at the beginning, because sometimes when I'm writing, there'll be a spot for a character and you start building that person and you start thinking, this is a cool character who could have their own book. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like Art from the Murderbot Diaries.
We will be talking about Art. In fact, I'm going to ask a few questions about Murderbot because everybody has questions about Murderbot. Adam says, Martha, I love your perspective of a Murderbot hacking its governor module and then trying to fit in and help humanity, similar to sort of an all-powerful like Superman. What do you think would happen in the real world when an all-powerful AI becomes sentient? Does that frighten you? Do you think that's around the corner?
It's definitely not around the corner. It's not at any point near our time. What gets called AI now are basically chat bots, predictive text bots. They're great for writing propaganda and plagiarism, but not much, and it's not very close at all to actual sentient AI. And I don't think that that's going to come up for a long time. And at least I hope when, if it does, we have more compassion for this species, this new species, than we do for animal species and others on our planet now. Like the way they was talking about this at a convention recently, and someone brought up something I'd also noticed, is that whenever they talk about a standard for what constitutes a sentient being, like tool use or using language or whatever, and then they'll find an animal species that does that, suddenly they'll change that definition. Well, now it's this. And so they're always like, lifting that or that glass ceiling a little higher. So I have a feeling that's exactly the same thing that's going to happen with sentient AI in the far future. Mm-hmm. But no, it's not close now at all.
Well, humanity doesn't always put its best foot forward, does it?
No, no.
I want to read this NPR review to you because it really encapsulates a lot of what I feel about Murderbot. It's hard to say exactly why I like Murderbot so much. There are subtexts to read into Murderbot, that is experiences coming out coming out narrative, that it mirrors the lives of trans people, immigrants, those on the autism spectrum, or anyone who feels the need to hide some essential part of themselves from a population that either threatens or can't possibly understand them, or both. What do you think about that? Like, is this something that you consciously do in your Murderbot books or all of your books to kind of shine a light on how humanity is?
I think it's both conscious and unconscious. For Murderbot, a lot of that is just how I saw the character. Some of it is just the way I think. I definitely have problems with anxiety. I'm probably somewhere on the autism spectrum, and so some of that's just my own, the way I think, my own experience. It really surprised me how many people identify with it in so many different ways. Some of them surprise me and some of them don't. But I think one of the things that caused that is being so specific about Murderbot's feelings and its reactions to things and what it saw and basically how it was affected by things. There's kind of old bad writing advice about being that making a character very general, the more general or generic you make the character, the more people can identify with it. And it's actually the opposite. The more specific you are about the character's pain, what the things they like, all these other little bits and pieces that make up a personality, the more people are going to find commonality with that. And again, a lot of the symptoms for depression and anxiety are carried through so many situations, that it's really easy to see these, to have that commonality, because a lot of people have that commonality with each other. They just don't always realize it.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think in part that's because people read into your books with their own lived experiences?
Probably. I don't think it's so much reading in as identifying with things that cause Murderbot pain or things that are comforted. I think it's identification, really.
Mm-hmm. Right. And interestingly, talk about comforting. I've heard that other authors love Murderbot because it's very comforting. There's comfort reads to them. I think I told you earlier that I heard about Murderbot from Nalini Singh, as well as from several members of my romance book club, and KJ Charles, all romance writers. So how is that for you to know that your books are impacting other authors?
It's really nice. I mean, it's been really great. It really helps me in general to hear people say that the book comforted them or it helped them get through a bad situation, because that's what books have always done for me, and books and TV and movies and everything. And it's really nice to be doing the thing that helped me and know that it's helping other people. Because when I was first getting online in the 90s, that's probably the first time I really got exposed to all the, escapism is bad and TV is bad and blah, 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 and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, sometimes you need a break. There's nothing, there's nothing wrong with comforting yourself with media. I think, God, I've lost his name now. I always do this, but the young guy that plays Harry Potter, when people were saying, people are obsessed with these books, and he said some people are obsessed with heroin. So there's no, there's nothing wrong, in the force now. And then, J.K. Rowling had to jump off the deep end and open her mouth and all that. But basically what he's saying is there's nothing really wrong with, being comforted by something. I've always really hated the expression guilty pleasure, and when it refers to, books or movies or TV that were put out in order for people to enjoy them. It's just implies that you should be doing more intellectual pursuits or something with your spare time, and just, yeah, I could go on and on and on, but yeah.
No, but Murderbot is actually like that. The serials and the, escape, and for whatever reason, they're not, participating in the things around them and finding comfort and escape in the media. So.
Yeah, I think so. And just the idea especially if you're having problems with things like depression and anxiety, you need something to kind of give you some relief so that you can deal with reality.
Mm-hmm.
I think we realized that a lot during the pandemic.
Yes, I mean, these sci-fi romance all like shot up in sales during the pandemic.
I know people thought that, or the publishers there was a big fear that people would stop buying books, because that's kind of happened at other points where something really huge and dramatic happened in the world. And instead it was like they did but it was like for a couple of days. And then everybody was like, the bookstore, the library, quick. So yeah, it's a basic human need. And there's nothing wrong if, your comfort is a TV set or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I think somebody said that they're trying to get rid of guilty pleasure out of their vocabulary. I always think things like trash TV or trash books or whatever, that, that sort of judgmental thing that we need to self-soothe is really judgmental.
Yeah. Yeah, it is really judgmental.
Right. So I'm going to go back to some of our audience questions, because I could ask you questions all night long. Mary asks, many of your books have settings where the characters interact with the remains of a mysterious, no longer existing civilization. Why is this a common framework in your work? And what is the underlying symbolism or driving force there?
I don't think there's any underlying symbolism or driving force. It's just something I've always loved when I read or watch it, in a story. One thing someone pointed out to me is, particularly where I live, there's a lot of the history of the place is still written, where you can see it in the buildings and the old houses, and you can see, the 1800s, the 1970s, the 60s, you can see it all there, still there. And so that's probably a bit of an influence. Mm-hmm. But also, I've just always liked that kind of story about investigating the strange place. I've always liked mysteries. Mm-hmm. And I've always liked interesting architecture. So it's just kind of like that particular story is just like a focal point or an intersection of a lot of things I've just always liked.
Mm-hmm. It's like the rings of a tree, like you can see where it started.
Yeah. That, this... places where you live that just like, there's places, gosh, I forget what it's exactly called, multi-layer occupation site, but places like London and Paris where there's just, and a lot of those layers are still actually there and still visible in places.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Murderbot always makes a distinction between humans and augmented humans, which I thought was really interesting too. Is that a personal thing? Is there a convention in the corporate rim or beyond?
No, it's a Murderbot personal thing, and it does that because augmented humans are the ones most likely to be able to figure out what it is. So particularly after it hacked its governor module, that's been it kind of sets them out as basically being a different category for it personally, because augmented humans are the ones who have generally have the the feed interface implanted in their brain, and that gives them more control over it and more ability to get into systems and stuff, which is why Grafton is augmented, and that's why he's the one who figures out something weird's going on with Murderbot.
Right. And that was really interesting that you had those 3 layers of like sort of human, augmented, and then fully Murderbot.
Yeah.
Which are still not fully, because they do have organic elements to them.
Yeah.
Did you ever have any thoughts of having like a fully automated AI, no organic material?
Art is.
Oh, art is, that's right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Yeah, a lot of the bots that it encounters, particularly in fugitive telemetry, are fully machine intelligences. They're just at different levels.
Okay. Yes, I have read them. I read them a while ago, so now I'm like, oh, that sounds dumb. Mary asks, roughly how long has the human civilization been spacefaring in the Murderbot Diaries?
I can't give an exact number, but basically, my idea is that there was a kind of a diaspora of humans out into space, and then a lot of that failed and kind of drew back, and then this one with the corporation rim is kind of a survivor, basically. And that's why in Network Effect they're finding, there's an earlier colony before the corporate colony that was there, but they have these, so even out there they have these different layers of humanity coming out, and also finding alien remnants from layers of alien civilization going out there.
Megan asks, I think this is about Witch King. She asked it a while ago, if there's a map of the world.
Yeah, it's in the hardcover. There's a map of the world.
Okay.
And I've got one like over there that I drew. They drew the map.
Just turn your camera around. We'll take a quick look at it. No, Carolyn says, can you describe how the idea of Murderbot developed for you?
It's really hard to do that because you get the idea and you kind of forget, at least I do, I kind of forget the things that led up to it. I always really liked science fiction, even though I mostly wrote fantasy. And there were so many good AI type or machine intelligence type books coming out for a while, like particularly Ann Leckie, Ancillary Justice. And I think I'd been thinking about a machine intelligence that did not want to be human, because there's been so many stories like Ancillary Justice, the main character doesn't want to be human. There's so many stories where, particularly older ones, it seems like, where, the robot wants to be human and blah, blah. And it's sort of like, why would you want to give up what you are, which is really cool, to become, human and have pain and age and all these other things. So that was part of it. Other part was I just got the idea for the story of the core story of All Systems Red, which was a security person who was supposed to be basically controlled or enslaved, who has freed themselves but kept that hidden, and then is going to have to reveal that to rescue people one really wants to rescue. And that's a science fiction story, so that's why I went for that. And it just makes more sense that way. So yeah, I'm not really sure what generated the ideas. Sometimes just come out of nowhere, or you don't really know where they come from.
Well, I mean, that you're a writer, that's what.
Yeah, that's sort of like my job.
So from Allison in my romance book club, she has a comment about the series characters that are so wonderful. She herself is a scientist, and so the series are the only books she's ever read that actually depict scientists as relatable human individuals. Do you have a favorite among the scientists? For Allison, it's Rocky and Gorathin. Yeah,
they're probably two of my favorites. Also, Dr. Bradwaj. who's kind of, though she's not really present a lot in the series, she's present because she's kind of become Murderbot's therapist. um, because being the person that it trusts enough to really kind of open up to. And so that relationship is always in the background. And so she's one of my favorites. And Dr. Mensah, you know, I probably love her best because I've done one short story from her perspective. I ought to do a short story from Dr. Bradwatch's perspective. That would be really cool. I should do that.
Yes, you heard it here, people. So your stories actually for the Murderbot stories are relatively short. Was there a reason for that?
Well, they were, the first one, All Systems Red, was going to be a short story. Mm-hmm. And then as I was working on it, I realized I didn't, because that short story has to be like under 10,000 words. And I realized that was not going to be enough time to do what I wanted to do. And Tor.com had started their novella line, I think the year before. They'd had it out for at least a year. And one of the first books was The Sorcerer of the Wild Deeps by Kai Ashanti Wilson, which was a fabulous book. And they're novellas, which means they're under 40,000 words. And so I thought, I just finished the first draft of The Harbors of the Sun, so I kind of didn't want to launch it into another book, but I wanted to write, finish this story in the length it needed to be. So I thought novella length would be good. And so with a publisher that was doing novellas that I knew, I thought, well, this is a good chance. And then they wanted to do, when they bought All Systems Red, they asked for a second one. Mm-hmm. And it could have been a different story, but they were also kind of looking for continuing novella series, like Shauna McGuire has done a series for them like that. And so I wanted to do, and I really wanted to write more about Murderbots. That's how it kind of got into a series.
Mm-hmm. Now you have System Collapses coming out in November.
Yes.
So we do have something to look forward to.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely. That was the one I had writer's block on when the pandemic started. But once I finished Witch King and kind of got it ready to go, then I was able to go back and finish System Collapse.
Thank you. They were all thankful. So somebody asked, was it your intention to make a character that will cause the gay awakening of a generation? Zed. Also, general good job about how refreshing the book is.
Oh, that was not my intention, but I'm glad it's going to do that. That's really nice.
What do you think about Asimov's quote, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic when comparing your characters in Witch King, the Raksura trilogy, and the Murderbot stories?
I think that's true. I mean, I kind of think of that as, especially far future science fiction, you're not really doing any kind of hard science fiction. Usually what you're doing is super science, which is what you see in, superhero movies and that kind of thing, where it's like, it sort of sounds like science, but if you really took it apart, it would probably not be very sciencey.
But there's that. Sun isn't scientific.
Yeah. And that kind of thing, the far future technology that it's not explained or anything like that. And also kind of the more Star Wars-ish version and the Sword and Planet version, where the fantasy and the science fiction is kind of blending back and forth into each other. Because one of the things I really liked in the 70s when I was growing up was, besides the feminist science fiction that was really getting started at that point, but the ones where it's fantasy, but they're clearly on a planet, and there's multiple moons, and there's these different creatures, so it's obviously not Earth. And then there's magic that might be telepathy, and that kind of thing, where it's sort of and then they'll have ray guns and some other technology. I just kind of really like that blending of science fiction and fantasy. Mm-hmm. And you didn't see that for a while because, like in I think the 80s, 90s, there was the categories. They were trying to keep the categories really strict between science fiction and fantasy, and dividing fantasy up into, a lot of little subcategories that didn't make much sense
Mhm.
Some nowadays it's like if it's secondary world, we call it epic fantasy. If it's set in modern day, it's urban fantasy or contemporary or whatever. But and those are really, I think, the only categories you need. Trying to divide up, decide what's arguing about what's epic and what's not epic is just so kind of exhausting and pointless.
Mhm.
Um,
It's an epic discussion, that's for sure.
it's an epic discussion.
So if we're going to talk about Asimov, I have to ask about iRobot, where they talk about the sort of rules for robots.
Yeah.
And how you actually really didn't. I mean, you didn't do any of that.
No, because I don't think it really works. And it's also that gets into a discussion people who are a lot smarter about that kind of stuff than me have discussed, and I can't remember the salient points of it, but no. I don't think that's going to be a thing in the future. I don't think that works in the real future. I mean, I don't think that works really the way that he thought it would.
It's very limiting,
It's very limiting.
Yeah. Jeffrey asks, the Asimov question was from Janine. Jeffrey asks, will you ever revisit the Raksura? Can we learn more about Moon becoming a father and raising his children?
Well, it's there's a little bit in the novella collections. If you have the Tales of the Raksura 1 and 2 has the ones where they actually have the kids. I don't know if I'll go back if I come up with a story that I feel needs to be told. But when you've done it's 5 novels and then 2 novella collections, that's a lot of writing. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to just kind of retread over ground I've already walked, basically, because sometimes you can get where you're just telling the same story again, but not as good as you did it the first time.
Yeah. I mean, I know that us readers are pretty demanding, but you have to write what you write.
Yeah, I have to be excited about it or I'm not going to want to do it and I'm not going to do a good job on it.
Well, that's what fan fiction is for, right?
Yeah, that's what yeah.
Jeffrey, write some fan fiction.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, was art always in its ship vessel?
Yes.
Okay, good to know. Megan asked, did you used to write fan fiction as Martha Wilson? That's where the fanfic came for me. I saw that earlier.
I used that name a long time ago in Star Wars fanzines.
Okay, all right. Cindy says, I was happy to learn some of your older works were getting a reprinting. I love the Fall of Ile-Rien trilogy. And I was wondering if it might be coming up for a reprint anytime soon.
No, because it's the ones that Tor.com is reprinting are ones that I'd gotten the rights back to after they'd gone out of print. HarperCollins still has the rights to the Ile-Rien trilogy and are holding on to it really tightly but not doing anything with it. So, yeah.
I have thoughts, but I'm going to go on to the next question.
Yeah.
Larry asked, and I had the same question. How did it feel to you to win the Hugo, the Nebula, and Locus Awards? Did it feel like you were a Triple Crown winner?
Yeah, it felt pretty great because at that point in my career, I'd had a lot of ups and downs, not very many ups, frankly, lots of downs. And the books of the Raksura, before Nightshade bought the Cloud Roads, I was getting ready to shut my career down and just give up and try to find something else to do. Because it just, my books weren't selling, there was 4 years where I couldn't sell anything. I still had stuff coming out because of things that had sold earlier, but then there was just 2 years with nothing. And so the Cloud Roads kind of rejuvenated my career, and it took a long time to build back up to even close to where I'd been before that. And I kind of expected, I thought, well, that I'm at the point where, I can write a fantasy novel and it sells pretty well. So this is probably about where I'll be lucky if I can stay at this level. And then Murderbot came out and just took off. And and that's the point where I had a Nebula nomination for The Death of the Necromancer back in like 1998. And I thought that's kind of it for me in awards. I'm not gonna, I won't be able to, I'll never have this experience. And so when I did get it, and then just it kept on coming, it was just really incredible. I can still hardly believe it at some points. So it was huge for me. Mm-hmm. And I got the call. Probably the first indication this was going to happen was when when you get a Nebula nomination, the president of SIFWA, at least now, this is the way they do it now, the president of SIFWA will call you and ask if you want to accept the nomination. And I got off the phone with her and just cried because it was just, it was so, I'd given up hope for anything like this. So yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Wow. Well, your story yourself, your story of what you've gone through and kept going is incredible to me. Rebecca asks, and I would like to know this too, would you ever want any of your books turned into a TV show? And if so, which one, or all of them?
It would be pretty cool. I've always felt, The Death of the Necromancer, especially when I saw, Penny Dreadful. I always wanted them to do The Death of the Necromancer with that kind of beautiful cinematography they did with that show. I thought the books of the Raksura would make a really cool movie or TV show. I think Murderbot will. So yeah, I would love to see that at some point.
I think we would too. What do you think it influenced the Murderbot series the most? Do you have any favorite depictions of robots in fiction that influence that?
There's a lot of influences. I think there was an old movie called War Games that came out in the 80s about a kid that starts interacting without really knowing with a supercomputer without knowing what it is. And it basically decides it would rather play games than do nuclear war. And I was kind of like, yeah, would you like to play a game? Somebody said on the chat. Yeah, that was probably a big influence. I don't think there's anything else more specific because there are so many good robot and machine intelligence depictions out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I completely agree, but I love Murderbot. Betty says, and she's not wrong, that the quote from Asimov was actually Arthur C. Clarke. So I just want to clear that up. Although mine was from Asimov about
the three robots are different, or the three laws of robots.
Right. So Megan says, how long did Murderbot exist before it hacked into its governor module?
Probably several years at least.
Okay.
Not a huge amount of time, but.
How is that possible? Aren't they, when somebody becomes not a Murderbot, but like half organic, half, robot, aren't they immediately turned part of the corporation?
Yeah, but it would have had to, I thought the question was until it
hacked its governor module.
It hacked its governor module, not until it got it. Yeah, it would have been given that. It would have been basically made with that. So yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. And Mary says, how did Garothan initially detect Murderbot on the survey when company techs and whoever else hadn't? Was Murderbot getting sloppy, or was Garothan more perceptive than we thought?
Well, it's because he's an augmented human, and he started to invest. He got suspicious because he's a suspicious person, and he thought it was working for the, he knew it was working for the company, so he thought the company was doing things through it. So that's what he was looking for. He wasn't looking for the fact that it hacked its governor module or anything like that. He just thought the company had given it orders that they didn't know about.
Good to be suspicious in these stories.
Yes.
Steen says Murderbot is often really curious despite itself and complains about its education being crap. Is it just unfamiliar with the existence of positive learning experiences, or is it just doing that self-protective thing?
It just doesn't want to. I mean, it when it hits where it needs that information, it's like, yeah, someone should have given this to me earlier. I should have gone and looked for this. But mostly when it has free time, it goes for the entertainment. So, which is kind of like me, at least. So yeah, it's not really self-protective. Or at least that aspect of it isn't. It's just, it has better things it wants to do with its time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, and to extrapolate on that, maybe the education wasn't that interesting for a bot, you know?
Yeah. They're given these modules, but how good are the modules? Probably not very,
Right. That's what I would think, that they wouldn't put a lot of money into that.
Yeah.
This is the question that it's a little bit long, so I'm just going to read the whole thing and you can let me know what you think of it. Lauren says, throughout the Murderbot Diaries, there's alien tech scattered around the universe that seems to try to unsuccessfully integrate with human arrivals. Do you have an idea of what the aliens that used to integrate with that technology were like, and what kind of parallels there may be between them and a bot human construct like Murderbot?
I don't think it's that. I do have a lot of that developed. It's not necessarily that it's trying to integrate with humans. It's that things that were designed for aliens, when humans do come in contact with it, it doesn't work right on them. It's like taking somebody else's medication, that's not meant for you. And actually that comes up as in System Collapse a little bit, where Rathy talks about it in Network Effect to a certain extent, but and it comes up a little bit in System Collapse when Murderbot kind of explains it to itself again, is that it's like if their shuttle crashed and it was buried, and then 1,000 years later aliens came along and touched the power source, and it poisoned them, or they touched the food and it poisoned them. It's just that kind of thing. So it's not, there may be some stuff out there that is actively reaching for a connection. It's not necessarily looking for a human, but the fact that it's still there, it's looking for anything, any sentient being, and it's encountering a sentient being that it was not designed for. So that's probably happening in some extent. Other stuff that's happening is just basically being, encountering like chemicals and substances that are toxic to you.
So you had said that you're more of a pantser. You just write. You don't things like that. But do you write down, and it sounds like you do some of the science so that it's rock solid and according to your research? How does that work?
There's not really much real science, and at least AI science in Murderbot. A lot of the people think I'm an artificial intelligence expert, and I am not in that. What I have worked with before is building databases and software kind of management and designing basically interfaces for people, menu-driven interfaces and programs and stuff like that for people to use. And so and also dealing with installing software and trying to teach people how to use it. So a lot of that stuff is more accurate than anything else in there. But for the world building, there's a lot of stuff I figure out about, how the world came to be and these different things they encounter and stuff like that. So that can inform the book as I'm going along.
Which I think is really interesting about science fiction, is that a lot of it is imagination until it becomes real.
Yeah, it's very hard to do near future because our technology has been progressing so fast, it's really hard to keep up with that. That's kind of like the cyberpunk books, the earlier cyberpunk books, where they don't have cell phones, because at the time you could not make those connections private, so people did not think cell phones would ever catch on. And so a lot of the people who were up on the technology assumed those kind of the mobile phones are never going to be that useful because of that. And they totally did not anticipate. Then actually the whole thing, like with the Star Trek pad and communicator and the tricorder and things, so it's like, that's pretty much like, put those all together and it's pretty much an iPhone or an iPad, People didn't think that was going to happen. And so it's really hard to kind of predict that technology unless you're so into that kind of gathering information on that you would not have time to write. So it's very difficult.
What do you think comes first then, like sort of the chicken or the egg? So you have the idea. Does that mean that people pick up that idea? Scientists will pick up that idea and be like, that's a possibility. Like I think of like The Fly, and transporting, or H.G. Wells with the time machine.
Yeah.
People are like, I could make that happen.
Yeah, I think people do. I think people look at it and go, yeah, I think Star Trek influenced a lot of people, and it's like, we have to remember when it came out, sliding doors were like, you're futuristic and stuff. And now they're in the grocery store and and things like that. And it's like, people see these ideas and think, well, that would be really handy to have that.
Yeah. I love that concept that an author or a science, a genre has created our science.
Yeah.
I'm going to go back to a couple of attendee questions. We have about 7 more minutes. Tyler asks, are we ever going to see Murderbot get dragged along on a vacation?
I don't know. It could happen.
I think we would be here for it. Steen asks, how much, if at all, is Murderbot overplaying scary art?
Not very. Somebody on Tumblr, I wish I could remember who it was, described art as Skynet from the Terminator, but if it had a family and had a job as an academic. And I thought that was really a really good description.
Okay. This is a question from somebody's friend who was at your Decatur signing event. You told her that Witch King wall walkers are based on the Imperial walkers from Star Wars, but Bashasha says that they eat grass. Since Imperial walkers aren't made for their heads to reach the ground, she'd like to know if you have any further thoughts on how this works.
Well, they don't, they're not exactly like, I was thinking of like, the shape is like that and the size is like that. But they're also, the way they would live is more like an elephant, so they can't get there. And Bashasa is making that up when he says they eat vegetables. He's just saying it so Kai won't freak out. They're really more omnivores. They can, their knees bend and stuff, so they could get down there if they wanted to. And also they have some tusk and kind of a somewhat longish snout. So yeah, it's not they don't look. I was thinking more about the size and the way they move.
Oh, okay. Can we get an update on Amina, Dr. Mensah's daughter, and system collapse, please? I love the relationship between Murderbot and Amina, especially when he scares off unsuitable boyfriends. Well,
system collapse is already, it's past proof. Actually, the proof stage was earlier. We had Macmillan does a thing where you have a cold reader who hasn't been involved in the process before, who will read it and then look for any, things they don't understand or typos or something like that, and then you can fix it. So it's already gone past that stage, so I can't change it at this point. There, it takes about a year from the time you turn in the final draft of a book to get it published, to publish to where the publisher can actually release it in ebook and print. So that's why they have to schedule things so far out. Amina is mentioned in there, but System Collapse takes place like right after, like a few days after Network Effect. Okay. So there's not much time for her to do anything at that point. Yeah, and I want to bring that up since I mentioned the publishing schedule. When System Collapse was first announced, people got upset because it was 6 months from then, and that it had been out. Because and this one guy, it just really got me, said 6 months out, it's just say you don't have it yet. And it's like, do you think that I send it in and then it just go? It's like there are so many people that between me finishing the book and even the point where the editor has gone over it, and then I've and made suggestions, or said this fight scene needs to be longer, and and that kind of thing, and you revise it and then turn it in. There's still so many people who have to be part of that book's life cycle to get it to the point where they can make the ebook file or send it to the printer or whatever. That it's just, I don't think people kind of get that.
Mm-hmm. I don't think people do either. But we readers are passionate. That I'll give them that one little bit. And I see there's a conversation going on in the chat about NetGalley and getting ARCs or advanced reader content. You have to be a reviewer or a librarian in order to have an account with NetGalley. But if you are, go for it. It's the best thing.
Yeah, you have to convince them to give you one for some reason. You have to have a reason. So yeah. Well,
I think that there's a lot of always concern about digital piracy. So
yeah, that's a huge problem, particularly for small press publishers. It can put a small press out of business. And I don't think people get that. It's not great for traditional publishers or large traditional publishers either, but small traditional press, it can really destroy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we just have time for one last question, which is just a total favorite of mine. Can you tell us what your all-time favorite book is, or books?
Oh, that would be really hard for an all-time favorite, because it's like I think everybody would have this problem because you change over the course of your life about what you like or dislike. I can just because I have so many favorite authors. Probably my original favorite author was probably Andre Norton when I was growing up, and then later it was Barbara Hambly, and I still love her work, and Judith Tarr. So there's this whole long list of people that could be.
Yeah, it's not a fair question, but I like to ask it just because sometimes people give us authors and books that they really. How about this instead? What is a book that you could recommend for us to read?
Oh, there's so many. Most recently, I finished Furious Heaven by Kate Elliott. It's the second volume of her. It's a space opera, epic space war space opera. I really love it. The first book is Unconquerable Sun, and it's kind of based on Alexander the Great, but gender flipped. Really enjoyed it. And the second book in particular is just so tightly paced, and there's so many real cool battles, and it's got the political intrigue and everything, and really great characters. Also, I really love Aliette de Bodard writes really good fantasy, and also her science fiction. She's got a series that's in novellas and shorter novels that's basically someone's just mentioned in the chat. It is sort of like it's a far future space empire kind of based on ancient Vietnam a little bit. And Nevo. Her name is Nghi, the VO. Siren Queen, which is early 1930s Hollywood with fairy magic and really scary, evil fairy magic. And it's kind of following this one woman, Asian woman, who's become an actress and it's hard to describe, but it's just an incredibly beautiful book, and it's really cool. She also did The Chosen and the Beautiful, which is a retelling of The Great Gatsby with magic. And she had I don't know if it won. Yeah, I think it did won. The Empress of Salt and Fortune, which is a short novella, secondary world fantasy, really good. It's kind of like an epic fantasy in one little short story. She's really fabulous. I love Nora Jemisin. The World We Make is the most recent one, I think. There's just so many.
So just one last quick question. So you read science fiction and fantasy for pleasure as well as for writing?
Yeah, and mysteries, but yeah, mostly science fiction and fantasy.
Oh, amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. We got a lot of questions answered, and I feel like I know you and your book so much better.
Oh, well, cool. Thank you. I enjoyed it. It was great talking to you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. Well, your fans are unbelievable. Just great questions, and obviously love your work so much. So thank you for taking the time to spend with us, and I hope that you do well. And we look forward to System Collapse and the second Witch King book whenever that comes out.
Well, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Good night, everybody.